Are you ready to learn the truth about what was really hidden behind the gleaming and majestic facades of Victorian mansions? What we see today in beautiful historical dramas is only a tiny fraction of the incredibly complex and strictly regulated life of the British elite in the 19th century. We are used to seeing only the outward appearance of this world, but behind the grand front doors, passions raged that were carefully hidden from the eyes of outsiders. The Victorian era was a time of great contrasts, where outward prosperity often coexisted with deep personal dramas. Behind the luxurious silk gowns and endless dinner parties lay an extremely strict system of rules, the violation of which meant complete and shameful expulsion from high society. In those days, reputation was the only real capital, and once lost, it could never be regained. The slightest deviation from accepted etiquette could forever close the doors of London's most prestigious establishments to you. People lived in a state of constant tension, afraid to make even the most minor mistake in public. Watch this video all the way to the end, and you'll discover the true, and sometimes terrifying, price of maintaining an impeccable reputation in the world of Victorian luxury. We'll take a look behind the scenes of the great empire to witness the sweat and tears of those who were obligated to always look perfect. You'll understand the sacrifices required to earn the right to be called a gentleman or a lady in a society that forgave no weaknesses. The true story of that era turns out to be far more gripping and grim than any modern screenwriter's fiction. A secret passed down from generation to generation is hidden in ordinary pieces of cardboard and folding accessories. In the Victorian era, the direct expression of feelings was considered extremely improper behavior. High society developed a complex system of secret signs to convey important information. An ordinary silk fan in a lady's hands became a veritable telegraph. Every movement of this object had a strictly defined meaning and was read by gentlemen like an open book. A rapid fluttering of the fan signaled strong agitation or dissatisfaction with the conversation partner. A slow movement of the closed fan along the right arm served as a clear warning that someone was watching. If a lady dropped this accessory on the floor, she was showing her affection for her escort. Touching her right lips with a closed fan signaled a demand for silence and discretion. In this way, the elite exchanged messages right before the eyes of the entire ballroom. Business cards served as an equally important means of communication. They were small rectangles of thick paper with the owner's name engraved on them. Leaving a card was considered a mandatory ritual when visiting acquaintances or arriving in a new city. The size, font, and quality of the paper instantly revealed a person's status. The absence of a business card or its improper design closed the doors to London's finest homes. The manner of presenting the card also carried a hidden message. A folded upper right corner signified a personal visit by the card's owner. A folded upper left corner served as a sign of congratulations on some joyful occasion. If the card was left with the lower left corner folded, it expressed condolences. Handing a card to a servant without folding the corners was considered a formal and dry greeting. The use of parasols was also subject to strict rules of nonverbal communication. Ladies never went out without this essential accessory of the Victorian wardrobe. A parasol held low signaled a reluctance to engage in conversation with an acquaintance encountered on the street. Twirling a parasol in one's hands demonstrated a touch of coquetry and a willingness to converse. Touching the ground with the edge of the parasol served as a signal to end the encounter. Men used pocket watches and canes for secret signals. Quickly pulling a watch from a waistcoat pocket signaled boredom and a desire to leave. Tapping a cane on the cobblestones expressed a gentleman's extreme irritation. Removing a top hat in a certain way could signify deep respect or slight disdain. Every member of the elite memorized all these nuances from an early age. Gloves were an essential part of the wardrobe and were also used to convey signals. Removing the right glove signaled readiness for a frank and important conversation. A lady slowly adjusting the buttons on her gloves demonstrated her anticipation. Striking the palm of the left hand with a glove expressed a categorical refusal or indignation. Appearing in society without this accessory was tantamount to a public insult to those around you. The entire life of the elite was an endless dance of hidden symbols and signs. Any careless movement could be misinterpreted and lead to a scandal. Aristocrats were constantly on edge, controlling every gesture and glance. This system allowed them to maintain outward composure under any circumstances. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the secret language of accessories. Please share your views in the comments, and be sure to subscribe to our channel. Are you ready for the shocking truth about how British aristocrats dined? A formal dinner in the Victorian era was not just a meal, but a complex theatrical performance. Preparing for such an event took several weeks of painstaking work by the entire household staff. The table was set with dozens of different utensils, each with its own unique purpose. A mistake in choosing a fork or knife could permanently ruin a guest's reputation in high society. The seating arrangement of guests was governed by the strictest rules of social hierarchy and status. The host and hostess always sat at opposite ends of the long table. The most honored male guest sat to the hostess's right. The lady of the highest status sat to the host's right. The remaining guests were seated according to their titles and level of wealth. The number of courses at a formal dinner was staggering in its scale. The standard menu consisted of at least 10 different culinary masterpieces. 2 types of soup were always served first, a clear broth and a thick cream soup. This was followed by fish dishes, adorned with intricate arrangements of vegetables and herbs. After that, the main meat courses and elaborate side dishes were brought to the table. Conversation at the table was also strictly governed by rules of etiquette. It was forbidden to discuss politics, religion, or financial matters during the meal. Conversation was supposed to be light, superficial, and pleasant for everyone present. Ideal topics included art, literature, the weather, or recent social events. Loud laughter or overly exuberant emotions at the table were strictly frowned upon. The pace of the meal was set exclusively by the hostess. Guests were not to begin eating until she had picked up her cutlery. If the hostess finished her dish, the servants would immediately clear the plates from everyone else's table. Falling behind the general pace or eating too quickly was considered bad form. One had to maintain a perfect balance between eating and social conversation. This complex mechanism of table etiquette functioned without the slightest glitch for decades. It allowed aristocrats to demonstrate their refinement and membership in an exclusive club of the elite. Every movement at the table had been honed to perfection through years of practice. What took place on the dance floor of the ballrooms was an even more striking spectacle. Guess what? Could you follow such strict rules at dinner every day? What lies behind the beautiful facade of balls will amaze you. Organizing a Victorian ball required the precision of a military operation and enormous financial investment. Preparations began several months before the scheduled date of the celebration. The hostess sent out invitations on special cards with gold embossing. Receiving such an envelope was the greatest dream of any debutante of that time. Preparing the ballroom began with meticulous care of the wooden parquet floor. Servants polished the floor with beeswax until it achieved a perfect mirror-like shine. This work took several days and required the use of special, heavy brushes. The surface had to be slippery enough for dancing, but safe for walking. For the sake of a single evening, the house was transformed into a veritable workshop. Lighting the vast halls was one of the most difficult tasks for the servants. Hundreds of enormous wax candles and crystal chandeliers were required to create bright light. Wax was an expensive material, so its use underscored the wealth of the house's owners. Special servants had to constantly ensure that the candles did not drip on the guests. They used long tongs to remove soot right in the middle of the dancing. The floral arrangements at the ball were striking in their scale and splendor. Huge compositions of exotic plants and fresh roses were set up in the halls. The plants were delivered from special greenhouses in enormous wooden tubs. Flowers were used to create entire arches and garlands that wound around columns and staircases. The scent in the room was so thick that it sometimes caused a slight dizziness among those present. During the dances, there were strict restrictions on physical contact between partners. A gentleman was permitted to touch a lady only through the fabric of her dress or her gloves. For a long time, the waltz was considered overly intimate due to the closeness of the dancers. Any conversation while moving across the dance floor had to be light and casual. The watchful eyes of the ladies-in-waiting tracked every movement of the couples on the floor. Special rest areas with refreshments were set up for tired dancers. In the adjoining rooms, comfortable armchairs and sofas made of expensive velvet were arranged. Servants continuously circulated with trays of lemonade, punch, and light refreshments. These rooms served as the perfect setting for private conversations and the exchange of social gossip. It was here that important political alliances were forged and future marriages were planned. After midnight, guests were treated to a lavish buffet dinner. Long tables were laden with exquisite dishes, cold meat appetizers, and elaborate desserts. Pastry chefs created actual sculptures of castles and ships out of sugar and marzipan. This was the time when gentlemen could show their consideration by bringing refreshments to the ladies. Dinner lasted about an hour, after which the dancing resumed with renewed vigor. The ball ended only in the early morning, when the tired guests began to head home. The host stood at the exit, seeing each guest off with a slight bow. Once the doors closed, a long and extensive cleanup of the halls began in the mansion. The servants returned the furniture to its places and collected hundreds of candle stubs. Don't forget to like this video if you enjoy these hidden details of history. The secret that people pay thousands for lies in the structure of the aristocrat's wardrobe. Victorian-era clothing was not merely a means of protection against the cold, but a complex social marker. The female silhouette was shaped using a rigid corset and numerous layers of fabric. The process of getting dressed was so complicated that it required the mandatory assistance of a maid. Lacing up a dress on her own was a physically impossible task for a lady. The corset was the foundation of Victorian attire and created the ideal hourglass figure. It consisted of thick fabric and stiff boning that tightly hugged the waist. The lacing was pulled very tight, which significantly restricted freedom of movement. Ladies had to keep their backs perfectly straight throughout the day. Sitting down or bending over in such a garment was extremely difficult. Beneath the dress lay a complex system of petticoats that gave the outfit volume. By the middle of the century, heavy fabrics were replaced by a crinoline made of steel hoops. This structure resembled a large cage and made skirts incredibly voluminous. The crinoline reduced the weight of the clothing, but created problems when passing through narrow doorways. Getting into a carriage required a lady to possess particular skill and grace. Men's fashion was no less strict, though more conservative in color. The foundation of a gentleman's wardrobe was a perfectly tailored frock coat made of expensive wool. Trousers had to fit impeccably without a single extra fold. A waistcoat was a mandatory element, which could be adorned with delicate embroidery. A snow-white shirt with a stiff starched collar completed the look of a respectable gentleman. Ties and neckerchiefs were tied in intricate knots, showcasing the wearer's taste. There were dozens of ways to tie a tie, each with its own name. A gentleman's shoes always gleamed with impeccable cleanliness thanks to the efforts of his servants. The use of men's perfume was considered excessive. Only the faint scent of fine tobacco was permitted. The top hat was the primary headwear, which was removed only indoors. The color palette of clothing also adhered to unspoken but strict social rules. Bright, garish shades were considered a sign of bad taste and lowly origins. True aristocrats preferred deep, rich tones of burgundy, dark blue, and emerald. Light pastel shades were permitted only in the summer or at balls. Dark colors were associated with formal events or late evening receptions. The fabrics used to make clothing spoke volumes about a family's wealth. Luxurious silk, velvet, the finest lace, and cashmere were available only to the select few. Cheap cotton and coarse wool remained the lot of the working class and servants. The beading and embroidery on the outfits were done by hand and cost a fortune. A Victorian lady's wardrobe was a veritable fortune. Maintaining such a large number of outfits in perfect condition required enormous effort. Maids brushed the dresses daily, removing the tiniest specks of dust. Ironing the intricate drapery took long hours and required precision. In the next chapter, you'll learn how the architecture of these homes helped hide these complex domestic processes from the eyes of guests. Why do you think Victorians needed to change clothes so often throughout the day? The layout of a large London mansion resembled a complex clockwork mechanism with numerous gears. The house was clearly divided into two completely different and non-overlapping zones. The front part was intended exclusively for the owners and their high-ranking guests. The service quarters were hidden from prying eyes and lived their own hectic life. The boundary between these worlds was invisible, yet absolutely insurmountable for the uninitiated. The reception halls were located on the first and second floors of the building, striking in their opulence. Wide marble staircases led to bright living rooms with high ceilings. Paintings in heavy gilded frames hung on the walls, and massive drapes adorned the windows. Everything in these rooms was designed to showcase the family's status and wealth. It was here that the official life of high society unfolded, with its receptions and dinners. The servants lived on the basement level and in cramped attic rooms under the roof. The basement housed enormous kitchens, pantries, and laundry rooms. It was always hot there from the constantly burning stoves and noisy from the cook's work. The maids' attic rooms were tiny, with minimal furniture and tiny windows. These spaces were connected by narrow, dark, and steep service staircases. The main rule of a Victorian home was the complete invisibility of the service staff. Servants were not allowed to move through the grand staircases and corridors unless absolutely necessary. For them, there was a system of secret doors, disguised as bookcases or wooden panels. A maid might appear in a room to light the fireplace and then disappear just as quietly. Guests were not supposed to see the cleaning process or the delivery of coal. Each formal room was equipped with a complex system of bells for summoning the servants. Next to the fireplace was a cord that one had to pull to send a signal. Downstairs in the kitchen or the servants' corridor, there was a row of small bronze bells. Under each bell hung a plaque with the name of the room from which the call originated. The footman on duty would immediately respond to the sound and go to carry out the order. The mansion's water supply also required the constant involvement of unseen workers. In most houses, there was no central water supply on the upper floors. Maids carried heavy jugs of hot water up the steep service staircases every day. This water was used for the owners' morning ablutions in their spacious bedrooms. The used water was carried back down to the service quarters in the same manner. Heating a huge stone house in the cold London climate was a continuous process. Every room had a fireplace that needed to be regularly cleaned and stoked. Servant boys carried heavy buckets of coal from the cellar several times a day. They did this early in the morning while the owners were still asleep, so as not to disturb them. By the time the owners woke up, the rooms were already filled with pleasant warmth. The house's architecture also took into account the need for ventilation and natural lighting in the service areas. Special wells made of white glazed brick were often built in the inner courtyards. These bricks reflected daylight and directed it into the dark windows of the basement kitchens. A system of chimneys ran through the entire building, providing draft for dozens of fireplaces. The house breathed and functioned thanks to these hidden engineering solutions. The contrast between the luxury of the grand halls and the austerity of the service quarters is striking. A Victorian-era house was a veritable machine serving the needs of a select few. All this complex infrastructure existed solely so that the elite could enjoy comfort. Behind every beautiful ball lay the hard labor of dozens of unseen people. Architectural solutions perfectly supported the strict social hierarchy of the time. The hidden truth that everyone keeps quiet about lies in the aristocracy's incredibly rigid schedule. The life of the Victorian elite was governed by a strict calendar, the main event of which was the social season. It began in the spring, when Parliament resumed its work in the British capital. At this time, hundreds of noble families left their country estates and flocked to London. The city was instantly transformed, filling with gleaming carriages and constant bustle. The main purpose of the season was to introduce young debutantes to high society. It was a complex process of bringing young women into the country's marriage market. Families spent vast fortunes on renting mansions, having gowns made, and organizing receptions. A successful season meant a profitable marriage, while failure could result in a social disaster. For those few months, the family's entire life revolved around balls and dinners. The schedule of events was so packed that it left no time for rest. The morning began with horseback rides in Hyde Park, where the entire society displayed their finery. This was followed by a series of daytime courtesy calls, strictly regulated by time. Evenings were filled with dinner parties and visits to the theater or opera in private boxes. The night ended with lavish balls that lasted until dawn. An important part of the season was attending royal receptions at Buckingham Palace. Being presented to the monarch was the official recognition of a debutante's status in society. Preparing for this moment required extensive training in the proper curtsy and impeccable manners. The dress for the palace had to comply with the strictest rules, including a mandatory train. The event itself took place in an atmosphere of incredible solemnity and absolute silence. The opera played a huge role in the cultural life of Victorian London. A visit to the theater was an occasion to show off one's finest jewels and finery. Aristocrats bought out boxes for the entire season, which cost a fortune. During the performance, people often did not pay attention to what was happening on the main stage. They watched each other through binoculars, exchanged gossip, and received guests. Sporting events were also a staple of the social season. The elite attended the races at Ascot, which turned into a veritable fashion show. Gentlemen placed large bets, demonstrating their financial prosperity and passion for gambling. Ladies strolled across the green lawns under lace parasols, discussing the latest news. Many informal political and major business deals were struck at these events. The Royal Academy of Arts opened its annual summer exhibition of paintings to the public. The opening day was the most important social event, which all members of the nobility sought to attend. Discussing painting was considered a sign of good taste and high intellect. The purchase of expensive paintings served as yet another way to affirm the status of an ancient family. The galleries were overflowing with a glittering crowd, assessing not so much the art as one another. The club traditions of Victorian British gentlemen were of immense importance. Along Pall Mall stood exclusive men's clubs with luxurious interiors. These were spaces where women were strictly forbidden entry by strict rules. Here, men could escape the hustle and bustle of the season, read newspapers, and drink porter. The clubs served as centers for political discussions and the shaping of the empire's state decisions. The season came to an end in August, when the hunting season opened in Scotland. London emptied as rapidly as it had filled in early spring. Families dispersed to their country estates to rest and recharge. Debutantes who had found a partner prepared for lavish autumn weddings in a small circle of guests. Those who were less fortunate began preparing for the next season with redoubled energy. This cyclical rhythm of life repeated itself year after year, sustaining the structure of society. The social season was not merely entertainment, but a vital social institution of the empire. In the next chapter, we will examine in detail the logistics of transportation in the Victorian era. Would you like to find yourself at such a large-scale and grand social event?
Political cost. Are we prepared to pay it?
Moving large families across the country required incredible organizational effort. The Victorian era marked a true transportation revolution in the country. A journey from the country estate to the capital turned into a massive expedition involving dozens of people. The family transported not only their personal belongings, but also some of their favorite furniture. Special transport companies and strong porters were hired to organize such a move. Before the advent of railroads, horse-drawn carriages were the primary means of transportation. Wealthy families owned their own luxurious carriages, adorned with family crests. The interiors of these vehicles were upholstered in expensive velvet and equipped with soft springs. Traveling along bumpy dirt roads took several long and exhausting days. Along the way, travelers often had to stop at inns for a comfortable rest. The advent of trains completely transformed the British elite's way of life. Railroad networks rapidly spread across the country, connecting major cities and remote estates. Travel time was reduced from several days to a few comfortable hours. Train stations turned into veritable palaces of glass and steel, symbolizing progress. Traveling by rail became not only fast, but also a prestigious activity. First-class cars represented the pinnacle of engineering and comfort. They resembled cozy living rooms with plush armchairs, carpets, and polished tables. During the cold season, the cars were heated using special metal heaters. Conductors in impeccable uniforms offered passengers tea, fresh newspapers, and warm blankets. The level of service on the train was on par with the finest London gentlemen's clubs. Aristocrats often chartered entire cars for their families and servants. This allowed them to avoid unwanted contact with members of other social classes. Luggage traveled in a separate baggage car and consisted of dozens of enormous trunks. At the destination station, footmen met this cargo and transferred it to waiting carts. The entire process was meticulously organized and functioned like a well-oiled machine. In London itself, various types of carriages were used for short trips. The light two-wheeled cab with a folding top was considered the most elegant and maneuverable. It was driven by a coachman who sat on high box seats behind the wealthy passengers. Closed carriages were used for evening outings to the theater or a ball. They reliably protected the ladies' elaborate hairstyles and expensive gowns from the London damp. Maintaining one's own carriage in the capital was incredibly expensive for an aristocrat. One had to rent stables, buy fodder, and pay high wages to coachmen. Therefore, many aristocrats preferred to hire carriages for the duration of the social season. The city streets were crowded with vehicles, creating constant traffic jams in the center. A coachman's ability to maneuver through this dense traffic was worth its weight in gold. Traveling abroad also became an integral part of high society life. The grand tour of Europe was considered an essential part of a young gentleman's education. They visited France and Italy, studying classical art and ancient architecture. Steamships provided regular and comfortable service across the English Channel. Wealthy tourists traveled with vast amounts of luggage and their own professional guides. Winter vacations in the south of France or Switzerland became fashionable at the turn of the century. The English elite escaped London's fog to the sun-drenched promenades of the Riviera. There they built luxurious villas and laid out beautiful, exotic green gardens. Hotels created an atmosphere that perfectly replicated the familiar, tranquil British way of life. Advances in transportation made the world smaller and more accessible to those who could afford it. The speed and comfort of travel became yet another way to demonstrate high status. The ability to easily cover vast distances underscored the elite's power over space and time. Technological progress fit seamlessly into the traditional way of life of the aristocracy. The empire's infrastructure worked to ensure the absolute comfort of its leading citizens. Travel logistics became a direct reflection of the British Empire's global power. After the London season ended, country residences became the center of social life. These vast estates were veritable autonomous states with their own laws. Manicured parks, forests, and endless green meadows stretched out around magnificent palaces. It was here that the aristocracy could take a break from the strict rules of metropolitan city life. But even this respite was strictly regulated by the unwritten laws of high society. Traditional weekends at the estate brought together dozens of high-ranking guests from across the country. An invitation to a renowned country house was considered a sign of special favor from the wealthy hosts. Guests arrived on Friday evening and stayed until early Monday morning. A separate luxurious bedroom with a fireplace and plush carpets was prepared for each visitor. The lady of the house personally compiled the guest list, taking into account their interests and potential conflicts. Mornings at the country house were spent in a completely free and very relaxed atmosphere. The men wore comfortable tweed suits, and the women came down for breakfast in simple dresses. Breakfast was served as a huge buffet with hot dishes on silver chafing dishes. Guests could come to the dining room at any time before noon that was convenient for them. After that, everyone went about their business, reading books in the library or strolling through the garden. Afternoon activities depended on the weather and the season outside the mansion's large window. On sunny days, picnics were held on the shore of a pristine lake with exquisite hors d'oeuvres and champagne. The ladies enjoyed a leisurely game of croquet on the perfectly manicured emerald lawns. The men preferred target shooting or long walks in the woods. The hosts often organized extended tours of their vast estates in warm greenhouses. The traditional 5 o'clock tea gathering brought all the guests together in the main drawing room. It was a time for leisurely social conversation, exchanging news, and light, polite flirtation. Thin sandwiches, fresh rolls, and sweet homemade jam were served on silver trays. The task of pouring tea was entrusted exclusively to the lady of the house or her eldest adult daughter. This ritual served as a bridge between a relaxed afternoon and a formal ceremonial evening. Evening dinner at the estate differed little from London's formal city receptions. Guests retired to their rooms to change into their formal attire and jewelry. The dining room was brightly lit by candles, and the finest antique family china was displayed on the table. The process of consuming the multi-course menu took several hours and was accompanied by polite conversation. The quality of the food and service demonstrated the wealth and refined taste of the residence's owners. After dinner, the company would move to the billiard room, the spacious library, or the music salon. The gentlemen smoked expensive cigars, played cards, and discussed political news from the vast empire. The ladies played the piano, embroidered with precision, or pored over fashionable French magazines. Sometimes amateur theatrical performances were staged, in which the invited guests themselves took part. The entertainment continued late into the night, after which everyone retired to their cozy bedrooms. Managing such a vast estate required extraordinary administrative skills from the owners themselves. The estate had to provide for itself with fresh produce, vegetables, and dry firewood year-round. Hundreds of farmers and tenants worked the lands belonging to the noble, aristocratic family. The steward regularly and strictly reported to the lord on the state of finances and the harvested crop. The economy of an entire county often depended directly on the prosperity of a single such large estate. Relationship with the local population were based on the principles of strict but fair paternalism. The aristocrats considered it their direct duty to care for the poor residents of the surrounding villages. They sponsored the construction of schools and hospitals and helped maintain order in neighboring parishes. During holidays, the estate owners hosted lavish feasts for their numerous tenants. This helped maintain social stability and foster genuine respect for the ruling upper class. Country estates were not merely homes, but powerful symbols of the British Empire's enduring strength. They were passed down through the generations along with titles, works of art, and enormous debts. The walls of these palaces safely guarded the secrets of several generations of noble, ancient families. Here, informal politics were conducted, and important decisions of global significance were made. Life on the estate struck a perfect balance between leisure and social obligations. The seamless functioning of an aristocratic household was ensured by a vast army of hired workers. The household staff constituted a complex society with its own strict internal hierarchy. Every worker knew exactly their place, their duties, and the strict limits of what was permitted. Advancement to a higher position in the household could take many years of hard, persistent labor. Relationships among the servants were often more formal than those between their noble masters. At the top of this hierarchy stood the butler, who enjoyed unquestioned authority among the staff. He was responsible for the work of all male staff, the condition of the wine cellar, and the silverware. The butler wore a formal black suit and had the right to give orders on behalf of the master. He was addressed respectfully with the title Mr., while the other servants were called by their first names. His salary was the highest, and he often had his own comfortable room. The housekeeper managed all the female servants and meticulously maintained order in the house. She was in charge of the keys to the pantries, the linen supplies, and the cleanliness of the reception rooms. She wore a dark dress with a huge bunch of keys on her belt, which emphasized her status. The housekeeper conducted daily inspections of the premises, ensuring there was no dust or dirt. She was also responsible for hiring and firing junior maids and ordinary kitchen workers. An important figure in the lower half of the house was the head chef or cook. This person wielded enormous power over the budget and the stomachs of the mansion's inhabitants. A good French chef cost a fortune and was a source of pride for the owners. Work in the kitchen began before dawn and did not stop until late at night. Under the chef's supervision, numerous assistants toiled, performing the heaviest labor. The owner's personal servants, valets, and maids held a special privileged position. They had direct contact with the aristocrats and knew all their many secrets. The valet shaved the gentleman, prepared his clothes, and packed his luggage for long journeys. The lady's maid helped the lady put on her corsets, did intricate hairstyles, and mended expensive lace. These servants often traveled with their employers throughout Europe. Footmen were the face of the household. Their main task was to open doors and serve meals. They wore special ceremonial livery adorned with family crests and expensive gilding. Tall, attractive men with perfectly straight posture were selected for this position. The symmetrical formation of footmen in the entrance hall made an indelible impression on arriving guests. They were required to stand absolutely motionless and remain silent until spoken to. The junior maids were at the very bottom of the service hierarchy in the large mansion. They woke up at 5 in the morning to clean the fireplaces and carry heavy coal. Their work consisted of heavy physical labor, washing floors, hand-washing clothes, and carrying water. Maids were strictly forbidden from being seen by the owners, and they worked mainly until breakfast. Their wages were meager, and they were granted a day off only once every few weeks. The servants' lives were governed by a strict schedule and incredibly rigid rules of conduct. They were strictly forbidden from forming romantic relationships within the household or getting married. If a maid got married, she was immediately fired, as it was believed she would become distracted. The servants' meals were simple and monotonous, starkly different from the lavish table of the masters. They ate in a special room in the basement, seated strictly according to their internal hierarchy. Despite the harsh conditions, working in a wealthy household was considered a great stroke of luck for the poor. It guaranteed a secure roof over one's head, regular meals, and a smart uniform. Experienced servants could save up a small fortune by the time they were old and start their own small business. Being fired without a letter of recommendation meant the end of one's career and the prospect of a life of poverty. Therefore, loyalty to the masters was often absolutely sincere and entirely voluntary. This well-oiled mechanism operated unnoticed, but without it, Victorian luxury would have been impossible. The servants were the shadow of the aristocracy, ensuring its absolute comfort every minute. The division of society into those who are served and those who serve seemed a natural order. The complex structure of the staff reflected the class inequality that reigned within the walls of grand mansions. The life of the elite was based on the invisible but constant labor of thousands of people. Marriage in the Victorian era was rarely based on sincere romantic love. It was a complex financial and social transaction between two influential families. The primary goal of the union was to preserve and increase wealth, as well as to strengthen social status. The young couple's feelings took a back seat to pragmatic, cold calculations. Negotiations were conducted by the fathers of the families with the active participation of experienced lawyers and solicitors. For young women of high society, marriage was the only possible path to a secure future. They were not permitted to work, own property before marriage, or pursue a university education. From an early age, their entire lives were geared toward preparing for this one main goal. They studied foreign languages, music, and etiquette to become ideal spouses. A young woman who failed to find a husband within a few seasons was branded with the humiliating status of an old maid. The rules of courtship were entangled in a vast array of prohibitions and strict conventions. Young people were strictly forbidden from being alone together in a closed room. Any meeting had to take place under the strict supervision of older female relatives or chaperones. Even an accidental touch of an ungloved hand was considered a serious breach of propriety. Conversation could only touch on superficial topics, completely avoiding any personal questions. If a gentleman wished to express his affection, he would send the lady flowers and invitations to dances. After several such gestures of attention, he was obliged to formally ask the girl's father for permission. Only after receiving the head of the family's approval could the suitor pay an official visit to their home. The courtship process could last for months, resembling a complex, multi-step game. Any deviation from the rules could permanently ruin a young debutante's reputation. The marriage contract was the most important document, detailing the financial aspects of the future union. It specified the bride's dowry, which came under the husband's full control. It also specified a fixed amount that the husband was obligated to pay his wife regularly for her personal expenses. This document guaranteed the woman's financial security in the event of sudden widowhood. Negotiations over these terms were often tense and could easily lead to the breakup of the engagement. The wedding celebration itself became a grand public event for the entire elite. The ceremony always took place in a large church, richly decorated with luxurious floral arrangements. The bride wore a white silk dress adorned with expensive lace and a very long veil. The color white came into fashion precisely thanks to Queen Victoria, becoming a symbol of purity and immense wealth. After the wedding, the guests would go to the bride's parents' home for a lavish, festive breakfast. The role of a chaperone in the life of a young, unmarried woman was absolutely critical. These were respectable widows or older female relatives who closely monitored their charges' every move. They accompanied the young women on walks, to balls, and during obligatory courtesy visits. The chaperone's task was to prevent any situation that might cast a shadow on the young woman's reputation. Their stern gaze and constant presence ensured compliance with all existing moral standards. Divorce in Victorian England was an extremely rare and incredibly scandalous occurrence. For a long time, obtaining a divorce was possible only through a special act of Parliament, which cost an incredible amount of money. Later, the procedure was simplified, but it still meant complete social ruin for a woman of noble birth. Society permanently shut its doors to a divorced woman, regardless of the reasons for the separation. Therefore, most unhappy couples preferred to maintain the appearance of a happy marriage at any cost. American-British marriages became an entirely new phenomenon in the social scene at the turn of the century. British aristocrats often held grand titles, but were burdened with enormous debts and crumbling estates. At the same time, American industrial magnates possessed colossal fortunes, but passionately desired status. The daughters of millionaires came to London and exchanged their money for the crowns of duchesses. These unions saved a vast number of ancient British families from complete financial ruin. Life after marriage brought a woman new responsibilities for managing the household and the staff. She became the mistress of a vast mansion and the representative of her influential husband's interests. The ideal Victorian wife was expected to be modest, submissive, and devoted to caring for the home. This facade of domestic bliss was carefully maintained in the eyes of high society. The strict rules of the marriage market served as a solid foundation for the stability of the entire British Empire. The life of the Victorian elite was full of surprising contradictions and the strictest of restrictions. Behind the glittering facade of balls lay a system of harsh rules dictating every step an aristocrat took. Their daily life resembled a complex theatrical performance where everyone was assigned a specific role. Please suggest topics for future videos that you'd like to see in the comments. Be sure to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on new, exciting historical explorations.